Now it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Ed Arnold. Ed is Vice President of Products for LeveragePoint Innovations. In his role, he manages customer relationships, provides training and coaching for new and existing customers, and provides strategic vision for the product based on his interactions with customers. He is a contributing author to the book, The ROI of Pricing. Previously, Ed held senior positions at Communispace, Diamond Management and Technology Consultants, and Omnitech Consulting Group. He holds an MBA in marketing from New York University and MA and BA degrees in political science from Boston University. So with that, Ed, welcome.
Thank you, Taylor. It's nice to be back again, and thanks to everyone who's watching today. Last June, I did a webinar about the challenges of new product launches and showed research from a number of industry experts making the case that poor communication is a leading cause for product launch failure. And so in this webinar, I want to provide some ideas for how to make value communication more effective. And specifically, I want to talk about value storytelling. It's something I've been devoting more of my attention to lately. This, of course, is vital for any new product that's being launched, but these ideas are also very effective for existing products too. So in terms of topics, what I want to do is first set a little context for what value stories are and why they're so important. And then next, talk about the reasons why value stories fail, and highlight some of the more common mistakes that we product managers make. Then I'll share a few ideas for how to develop more effective value stories, and followed by some examples and a couple of success stories. And so let's get started. Well, as many of us know, the track record for new product launches isn't a pretty picture. And the success rate has been dismal for a long time. Only 1 out of 4 new products ever reach their revenue or profit target. And one report says the main reason for this is the quality of the value story. In other words, you can do everything right in terms of the innovation and the rollout, but you can miss if you fail this critical step. So don't take my word for it. Listen to what these experts say. So we're going to start off with a quote from Tom Nagel. And he said in a recent white paper that companies that lack a formal method in value communication in the sales process are vulnerable to purchasing departments that commoditize the differentiation of their products. And another quote, and I really like this one because it comes from a new book that came out last year called Monetizing Innovation, written by a couple of Simon Kucher partners. And they say, mastering the art of value communication is just as important as mastering the process of designing products that customers will pay for. If you can't clearly communicate that value, how can you expect customers to understand why they need your offering and why they should pay for it? So, well said. You know, companies spend billions of dollars in product research and development, and we as product managers need to do a much better job in creating great value stories. So before we go any further, I'd like to clearly define the concept as value. And for that, I'm quoting one of our good friends, Mike Wilkinson from Axia Value Solutions, since he's written a number of really excellent articles for us on our LeveragePoint blog. And I strongly recommend the latest one, where he states an obvious but overlooked point. Our customers define customer value, not us. And I say often overlooked because in my own experience working with many product managers, some that have engineering backgrounds, they tend to have a bias in perceiving value as some sort of objective, scientifically proven concept. And for them, it's truly a revelation when they realize that it's not. It's really a combination of different things. And to explain this, I'm going to borrow what Mike calls the value triad. And what this does is explain that customers think of value in terms of economics, and that can come from revenue gain, that can come from cost reduction, but it also comes from something called emotions, things like trust and risk. And the emotional side of value, interestingly enough, was a big theme at last year's Professional Pricing Society conference. And just to go off on a little tangent here, it was interesting that the keynote speaker at that conference was not your usual pricing thought leader. Instead, they brought in a senior advertising executive, an obvious expert in the field of customer communication and psychology, and he used this metaphor of the elephant and rider to describe how the human brain operates and makes decisions. And so it goes like this. The elephant is the subconscious mind, whereas the rider on top of the elephant represents the rational conscious mind. Now, the rider thinks he's driving the elephant, but in reality, the rider is delusional because he exerts only minimal control, and the elephant's going to go where it wants to go. So take, for example, how the brain would react to a price decrease, right? According to economists, they would say that the rational mind would say, this is a welcome bargain, lower price, I'll buy. Whereas the subconscious mind would see this as a confusing signal, maybe even an alarming signal, and start asking itself, well, why did they lower the price? Where's the catch? And there were other presentations at PPS that talked about this phenomenon of raising price and increasing volume. So I guess the key lesson here is that you need to get inside your customer's brain to write an effective value story. Now, this picture gives us a clue for understanding why some value stories fail. And it's really because we product managers tell terrible stories. We're terrible storytellers. And especially when we try to make the value case with an overwhelming amount of detailed evidence. And if you do that, you might get this type of reaction. So this is why many value stories tend to miss the mark in some specific ways. One, they're too product-centric, and that's no surprise because that's where you have the most data, but you need to get beyond that. Second, it's not tied to what customers really care about. And a cause for this is that a lot of product managers don't get enough customer contact, and it shows. Their understanding of customers is based on limited or secondhand information. So what you need to do is find out what customers really care about, and not so much what you think they should care about. Too complex, as I mentioned before, is a problem. You can get a lot of things about your value story right, but if the customer is overwhelmed or confused by TMI, you've missed. And then lastly, not tested, especially in the field. And to me, this is the most fatal mistake because the other misses above can be corrected with testing and iteration. And in many companies that I interact with, there's relatively low collaboration between the products and the sales functions. And that's why things aren't tested. On the other hand, our more successful customers are those who increase that collaboration. And testing value stories in the field is a really great way to do that. So here's a great example of a successful value story, and it's one that I think everyone here should know. It's this little green guy, lizard guy, with the funny accent, and I think most of us can recite his value message from memory, which is 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance. So let's look at some of the issues with existing value stories. Is it too product specific? No. Is it tied to what customers care about? Yes, I think so. And is it too complex? No, I don't think so. I think this is a very elegant story that's very memorable. Now, just think for a moment what some product managers might do with this value story. they may get rid of that lizard and replace it with some kind of process map. And they may change the message to say, well, it's really between 13.5 and 22.75 minutes, depending on where you're calling, the time of day. And on average, it's somewhere between 14.9. I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think you get the point. To me, the most fascinating thing about this particular example from Geico Insurance is who owns Geico. And it's none other than this man, Warren Buffett. And he's someone who really does know what value is, and we use his quote frequently here at LeveragePoint. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. Okay, so here's a useful checklist for evaluating your own value stories. It first should tell how the customer benefits from your solution. It's relevant to their specific business needs. It differentiates yourself from the competitive solutions, quantitatively estimates how much better off they can be, and advances your solution in the customer's buying process. And I think that Geico example meets all of these criteria. Now, another way to look at this, and again, I'm borrowing from Mike Wilkinson and Axia, is this 3 components of winning VPs or value proposition. So this is a nice framework for evaluating whether you're messaging correctly. And what I most like about it are these 3 elements here. Does your value story resonate? Does it differentiate? Does it substantiate? Okay? So where I'd like to go next is to talk about some of the detailed pieces of a good value story, and that's namely the narrative and the illustrations. So let's start off with value messaging. Value messages are the backbone of the narrative. They are the 2, 3, or 4 statements you tell the customer that connects your product to their needs. So how do you express that? And I think the best way to do that is to show a few examples from some of the value stories that we've written. So let's take this one. If the headline is reduce aftermarket warranty costs, you can express that as reduce existing aftermarket warranty claims and returns because of better performance against chipping and rust. Or in another example, reducing compliance risk, you could say a streamlined automated system reduces risk of compliance event occurring. This one about a non-productive time, new formula eliminates the most common types of contamination that causes shutdown, thereby reducing costly non-productive time. And this last one that's talking about increased revenue, bucket size and configuration result in faster loading time for trucks, improved cycle time, and less passes. So all 4 of these from 4 different examples gives you an idea of how to express that. Now, writing is an art form, and to some extent, quality is in the eye of the beholder, yet 2 key things you need to ensure are, first, that the value message is crystal clear, like in these examples, and 2, you use the language of the customer. All right, next I want to turn my attention to the visuals. That is the charts that you use to show your quantified value. And this in itself is a deep topic because there are a lot of different ways to show value and different types of charts, etc. And we've written a number of articles about this on the LeveragePoint blog, myself and Peyton Marshall. So you might want to check some of those out. But today I want to talk about 2 specific charts. On the left is what is called a total cost of ownership chart, TCO, and on the right we have the value stack. And what's interesting about these examples is here we're using the exact same data, so we can compare the pros and cons of each. Now, on the left, the TCO chart, its chief advantage is its simplicity. Your competitor is on the left, you're on the right, the lower cost is good, and if your bar is lower, you're better. Done. That's what value in a TCO chart looks like. But although that's true, and it's why it's used a lot. It does have a few drawbacks, and one is that it's limited to only showing costs, right? So total cost of ownership is cost-based. So remembering Mike Wilkinson's value triad, there's another leg to that, which is revenue, and you can't really show revenue in a TCO chart. Another limitation is that TCO works best in direct apples-to-apples comparisons, in other words, direct competitors. Sometimes you might have a competitor reference that isn't that simple. You might have a totally new innovation where you're competing with a status quo situation, which technically has no direct cost. Now, you could try to express that in the bar, but then you're sacrificing some of the simplicity to explain where you got those costs from. So on the right, the value stack is an alternative that gives you more options. Now, for those of you who understand or are familiar with EVE or economic value estimation methodologies, this should be very familiar to you. And the big difference between this and TCO is that we're showing differential value as opposed to total cost. So for example, you may see this dark green bar on top of the stack called energy, okay? And what that is showing is the net difference between the two light green bars on the left. That's $7.3 million and $4.745 million, okay? So if you subtract those two, the difference is the 2.5 million, and that's what the dark green energy bar is showing. And that's differential value. And that's the fact really behind the key value message. And in many ways, that's why I think this is a superior way to show value, and it supports our value discussion. But to do that, you need to be comfortable with this chart. Now, we at LeveragePoint upgraded the original EVE chart to include this last bar, that includes price and value to customer. In this case, it's $280,000. And that shows the bottom line number of why customers should do business with you. In fact, that's probably the only value number you really need to show. And you can make that into a simple graphic or a headline. All right. So one thing that we've come to appreciate recently is that when it comes to value stories, one size definitely does not fit all. You're going to need to have a small, medium, and a large version of the same basic story. And you might need to have different colors for different customer stakeholders as well. And here's why. You know, value stories are used to support your sales team in their discussions with the customer throughout the customer's buying cycle. So I'm going to walk through a typical cycle and show how value stories can be used, and then I'll follow that up with some specific examples. So for example, early in the identification stage, you know, we product managers create tons of materials for this stage, especially when there's new product launches. We're creating things like brochures, spec sheets, presentations, videos, etc. And yet, if you look at these big piles of collateral, there's actually very little in the way of cohesive value stories. And trust me, I've looked through many of these piles. It's very product-centric. What we're proposing, that one of the best pieces of content you can create here is a case study. Ideally, a flexible one that can be adapted for different customers and stakeholders. Now, during the middle stage of the buying cycle, during the so-called evaluation stage, and traditionally, there isn't a lot of new content created here, except maybe for spreadsheets. This is the land of, you know, financial models that calculate cost savings or ROI or break even, and we've seen a lot of these over the years, and some of them are well designed and others maybe not so, and they're almost always the result of a solitary individual, either in pre-sales or in product. And they do quantify value, but I think one of the downfalls of that is that they don't tell a very good story. So the alternative we're suggesting here is what's called a customer value analysis. And think of this as a case study where the customer can actually write themselves into it and begin to get a directional sense of what it's worth to use your product. Finally, at the late decision stage, this is really a bit of a black hole. There isn't really a lot of value content that's created here, other than maybe more elaborate forms of the spreadsheets. But once you get into that sort of situation, it becomes more of a negotiation tool. The financial pros come out on both the buyer side, and it's used in that way. What we're proposing instead is to develop what we're called a shared business case. Not for negotiation, not for defense, but rather as a way of collaborating in a deeper discussion between the buyer and the seller, where the buyer can actually shape and fill in the blanks of the story. And so that's the goal. Next, I want to show a couple examples for all of these three stages. Okay, so here's a case study format. And again, this is designed to be used in the early stage. And the purpose of this is to generate interest and gain credibility to move ahead in the buying process. Now, this is a template that we've actually created here at LeveragePoint for our own customers to capture their success stories using LeveragePoint in order to encourage more adoption. By the way, AirVentus is not a customer of ours. It's a totally fictitious company. So the first thing I'll point out is that overall, this is in an article format. It's an easy to read piece, but I want to point out a couple key elements to it. The first is this testimonial quote. And I think quotes, especially from customers, are great because they're memorable and they make some sort of human emotional proof point to the reader. We also provide a very short list of value messages, the areas that customers care about. And then you'll notice here there are not a whole lot of numbers or calculations, but they're just true operating results, things that the customer really cares about. And in this case, we're not even showing dollar amounts. We're showing percentage improvements in key operating areas. And then I think most importantly is the ending. What is the happy ending to the story? You know, it can be expressed in terms of the dollar impact or just in terms of the outcome. So in this case, what we're saying is AirVentus won an important deal and opened the door to new opportunities. So this is a great way to introduce yourself to customers to highlight what your value story is. Now, moving on to the next stage, here's a format that you could call a customer value analysis. And essentially what this is a dynamic case study. Now in this case, I switched the context of the example. This is still AirVentus, but this is what AirVentus would use to sell to its customer, as you can see, a defense manufacturer facility. There are a few numbers in here, but not too many, and the format is designed to tell a quick story, all on one page. And let me give you an accelerated version of that. I begin by pointing out this number. That's the value to customer. This is how much we can save you per year. Do I have your attention? And I could show you where that number came from, that the customer has, with their current solution, a lot of additional cost. And where are those costs coming from? Well, three particular areas: energy, downtime, and maintenance. And actually, I could tell a sub-story, a subplot for each one of these things if I wanted to. And I could also customize the story for that particular customer. I can take a key variable about their facility size or how much they're paying per kilowatt, and the whole calculation updates automatically. So that's a real quick and easy way to tell a story in the middle of the process. Now, at the end of the process, we're going to get a little bit more granular here. And this is another view of this same value story. And you'll notice here that I've chosen a TCO style chart because it fits in well in this case. And below the fold, you'll see all the calculations and the variables in handy-to-use lists. Now, working alongside a customer that wants to put some time, they can configure this case study to the deepest level of detail, maybe 20 or 30 different variables, to arrive at a relevant number of a value estimate to that customer. But here's the important thing in all this. The number really isn't necessarily more accurate. What's really important here is this process of collaboration with the customer to develop this business case. In other words, the customer is writing themselves into the story. Now it becomes more believable to them because they helped design it. And that's what makes this more powerful. You're taking the elephant in the direction of where you want to go. So I want to conclude by sharing a couple of quick success stories working with customers on effective value communications. And let me just state that these success stories I'm sharing you are highly disguised to protect confidentiality, but I hope they give you an idea of what a good value story could do in a couple of contexts. And we work with a lot of customers in the OEM space. And the first one was in the energy industry, where our customer was selling components into energy infrastructure OEMs. And a value story was used in the context of presenting a new product innovation into that OEM's product line. And they presented a convincing story. And the win here may not sound very dramatic. We're talking about deferring discussion about the discount level. But it was a really important outcome in the sense that it changed that tone of the buying discussion from discounts to value. Okay, so that's the first example. Another example in a totally different industry was a supplier into the transportation industry. And this was used in the context of meeting their procurement managers. And because of the way the story was told, it led to an increase in business, and it actually helped keep a competitive threat at bay. All right? So talking about the customer, developing a good value story actually, helps protect your relationships with existing customers. All right. So let me just conclude with a final few points. First, get inside your customer's head, both on the conscious level and the subconscious level. Next, make it a collaborative process. Work with sales, work with the customer, do things to get their input and not work in isolation. And remember, while you're doing that, it's an agile process. Don't wait, iterate. And avoid that one-size-fits-all. Adapt your story for the stage of the buying cycle as well as who you're talking to. And lastly, consider using a digital platform to manage the content. The way to scale this is to have a shared platform where you can have digital case studies that can be customized and presented in a variety of standard formats. We do this sort of thing with our customers all the time, and I encourage you to contact us if you want more. So that's it. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you, Ed, for sharing those insights. And we've had a few questions come in during the webinar, and there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. While you're entering, a reminder to complete the 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of How to Put a Value Tag on Your Product and be entered into a raffle for one free copy of the ROI of Pricing. All right, let's get started on Q&A. First, to answer the most popular question myself, yes, this webinar is recorded, and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. All right, first question, Ed. Why not do this all using spreadsheets and PowerPoints in a shared drive?
Yeah, that's usually the default solution for that. And I think the biggest issue with that is that it's not scalable. Once you put things in a shared drive. You have issues of version control. You have issues of searchability. There's a lot of reinventing the wheel. It's really hard especially for salespeople, to get the information they need instantly. So for all those reasons, keeping things on a digital platform is way more efficient and saves you a lot of time.
Great, thank you. And next one, what is the best unit of measure to use in a value analysis?
All right, so this is getting more into the quantitative side of the value story. And I think, a general one is per year or annual. Especially a lot of case studies are written that way. Now, for the other formats, especially if you're getting into more detail, it's good to express the value in multiple units. So you might want to talk about it in terms of the customer's unit of finished goods, say per instrument or per vehicle. And that really depends on the industry. But having a couple units of measure can make the case more relevant to a specific case study if they're looking at productivity on a finished good basis as opposed to an annual basis. For executives and procurement people, per year is probably what they'd want to see it in.
All right. Next question. What about ROI as an indicator?
So, ROI is often used in these types of case studies, and if that's what your customer is expecting, then you should go ahead and use it. But it's kind of risky to use that as the only number. It's a good additional number to have in your value cases, and there's a really good blog that Peyton Marshall had written about that. From my own experiences, I found that since ROI is used a lot, sometimes customers are a little suspicious of it because they can be, overstated or manipulated. The other thing is that, an ROI number can't be drilled into like a value number. I could take that value to customer number, I could break it down into its different pieces and talk about that. An ROI number is hard or impossible to do that.
Okay, great. And here's another one for you. I fully agree that showing value based on competitors makes sense. But at end of discussions, there comes a zero-sum game where if the buyer can negotiate an extra 10%, they win more. Any suggestions as to how to avoid that?
Yeah, well, there's two parts to that. One is the comparisons, right? So you have to compare it to what they're using today. Value is not an absolute concept. A value is always in relation to what else I could be doing. And that could be doing nothing, for example. So it's important that you make the right comparison, because what you're trying to do is get the customer to consider possibly spending a little bit more in their outlay to get a better performance outcome that will lead to better profitability, right? So you have to show it that way. And that leads to the second part of that question, which is it zero sum? Zero sum, implies that, you have to give all your value away for the customer to use it, but you don't get anything out of it. The customer, if they realize that they're getting more value, should be willing to pay more for it. I think discounts are given because salespeople aren't confident of their value story, because they're not given the information to confidently state that case. So that's my response to that it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. And actually, if you have a good relationship with a customer and they understand and you collaborate with them in terms of what their issues are, it's different. Now, you have a procurement department whose job it is to be zero-sum. And you can't avoid that. That's what they do. We deal it with ourselves at LeveragePoint, but they're not the only stakeholder. There are other stakeholders in the organization that understand the value case, where you should be making the value case, and that's where you should put your attentions there.
Great, thank you. And next question, getting customers to collaborate where they want to commoditize the offering is tough. Any tips on how to gather what we could call the voice of the customer? To help them collaborate.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's why the field testing is, in a sense, doing voice of the customer research. One of the things that I've learned in my background in doing customer research is that if you go and you ask customers what they want, they'll either make up something or they have a hard time describing it. Whereas if you actually do some concept testings and say, look, here's a solution that we're going to bring to the market. We want to get an understanding of what you think this fits in with your operating needs. You start having that voice of the customer discussion. What do you find out? Well, you find out what's most important to them. You may have a solution with a lot of differential features in it, but a lot of times customers only care, or certain customer segments only care about 2 or 3 of your list of features. Zero in on them, try to understand why they're important to them. Once you understand why they're important to them, then you have a qualitative sense of how it connects to their business. Once you understand how it connects to their business, you could actually start putting dollar figures to that. It's not a commodity if you have differentiation. The customer procurement negotiation game is to make everything a commodity. But even commodities are not commodities, especially when you start to think about services like delivery, technical support, and things like that. Those are not commodities. So you have to banish that word commodity from your thinking as a product manager if you want to differentiate on value. Because if you don't have that, your only other alternative is to be the lowest cost supplier in the world. So you have to think about the solution, differentiation, and in terms of how this gets started on that, you have to select which customers you begin to collaborate with. You could talk about customer buying segmentation, where there are certain class of customers that are never going to collaborate with you. Don't put your efforts there. Put your efforts on your best relationships, where you do have a spirit of collaboration, where you could start testing ideas before you're in that buying cycle. That's really important. And there you'll get some great insights to tell a good value story.
Great. And how do you deal with, if you ever run into these people, how do you deal with buyers that are either unable to buy on value or they've never done it before? They don't get it, they're uncomfortable. How do you get through that challenge?
Well, I mean, let's just go back to our green lizard friend. 15% 15 minutes can save me 15% or more, okay? That's all you need to understand about value. So value means you're better off economically working with us than the customer. So that's a very easy, than the competitor. That's a very easy thing to understand. I think everybody who buys anything intuitively understands that. I'm sure everybody in the audience has certain product categories, whether it's automobiles, wine, restaurants, clothes, electronics, whatever, where you're willing to pay more to get more. And so in positioning your solutions to customers, you have to take that same approach. You have to explain it in exactly the same way you think about things when you buy. And again, it's the elephant in the rider. You pay more, but you feel safer because you know it's not going to let you down, right? That's really the whole essence of that metaphor.
Yeah, and building off of that a little bit, and your next question, some values are difficult to quantify. For example, peace of mind or brand perception. Do you have any advice to take these parameters into account in the value analysis or business case?
Yeah, absolutely, and that gets into the skill of putting together value quantifications. And when I work with product teams, I probably spend half of my time dealing with this particular situation. And if you've looked at our blogs, you'll see that just about anything can be quantified, no matter how intangible, if you spend enough time thinking and measuring it. Things like brand reputation is a label for some very, very specific reasons why people buy from you. Or peace of mind, for example. What does peace of mind mean? I won't fail. Well, what does failure mean to me? Well, I don't have to wait for something when I'm in a hurry. Well, what does that mean? Once you start to unpack that and really understand what peace of mind means for your customer, exactly where it touches, how it disrupts their operations, what's the cost of that. Once you start zeroing in on it, very specific use cases, then you could quantify it. And you'll find that it's really not that hard once you do it a few times. And we have teams that are very, very good now at quantifying all of these.
Great. And going off specific use cases, that brings us to our last question. When your offering has different options, do you prepare separate value charts for each, or start with one and show incremental differences, or is there another way?
So you could do it both ways, but I think what we're doing more is the ability to toggle between different situations. So say, for example, I have a value chart that's against competitor X, and there are 3 value drivers there, and there's a bottom line value to customer. I could click a button, say, and replace what that competitor is, so it will change the reference price, and it may change the performance against those 3 value drivers. It's the same look, but it would show the value. So that's probably the easiest way to do it, and I think one of the things that we've learned working with customers is that, and especially sales users, is that they want that one button click. They want that quick toggle. So flip back and forth between the different situations. Pick the situation that matches that, and then focus on that case.
Great. Thanks, Ed. And that's about all the time we have left for today. And just a brief reminder before you go that next month we'll be hosting another webinar, Using Value Tools to Support Value-Based Selling, presented by Tali's Chief Value Officer, Stefan Liozu. If you're interested in registering for this webinar, please check the appropriate box in the exit survey. And that's it from us for today, so thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Ed for his insights. And from all of us here at LeveragePoint, have a wonderful rest of your week, and take care.